Hey, Rose, thank you for joining us today on Sustainability Square One. You are one of the people I think of when I think about waste expertise. So one of my very first questions is, how in the world did you get so interested in waste?
Oh, thank you. I think it came pretty naturally because at the time I was working at a company called Imperfect Foods, now called Misfits Market. And the mission of the company is really around reducing food waste in the food system. So waste was this natural through line when we started creating sustainability initiatives for the company's operation itself. So in that case, in our case, it was really about what is coming into our facilities and how do we make sure that as many of the materials that are coming in our doors are avoiding the landfill, are going to reuse, donation, compost, et cetera. So that's part of the reason it came into my life around 6 years ago.
And you mentioned one of the things it took me a while to get my head around, which is, where does waste go? And so when you look at, what you're reporting for Imperfect, now Misfit Foods, and what you see more generally in the U.S. landscape, where does waste go, and what gets you excited about something that's new that's happening in that space?
Well, I think it was the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that said, waste is a design flaw. So a lot of times when we say waste, which could be anything from, in the case of Imperfect or Misfits, or really anyone's home, it could be food that's, no longer good to eat or sell. It could be pallets that can be reused. It can be a lot of cardboard. All of those things, could be waste. But if we design our systems differently, it can actually be reused, repurposed, or at least recycled, instead of going to the landfill. So waste in general, it can sometimes be recycled or landfilled in the US, and other times it can be shipped overseas to be recycled. So it really just depends on the material itself and what the possible outcomes are.
And what is the importance of waste in a business model? Is it like it's nice to have because you're reporting something, or does it actually change the P&L in any way?
Yeah, it does. I mean, waste is very expensive. I don't have to tell you. We've all seen our waste bills at home, but also when you're talking at a business level or an industry level, it's very expensive to throw things in the trash, which is great, because it means that waste is one of those things where the sustainability incentive is aligned with the financial incentive. So we want to keep waste out of the landfill, repurpose this waste or recycle it, and that can help us save on operating costs too.
So one of the things I've noticed when preparing waste data, we do this now for quite a few customers, is they give us their waste invoices and we're like, oh, source of truth, this is awesome. But It actually takes a huge number of conversion factors to go from like yards to, weight, and because that depends on the waste type, and then weight to emissions. So when you think, have you ever seen a study where they actually measured the weight of real containers as they were picked up, and then actually scientifically went through that entire flow to this is the emissions, and said, okay, the estimates that we all use are wildly wrong or wildly correct?
I mean, I know yards is a really weird unit of measure that I think you see in the world of waste. Yards are how you measure your waste bin. So like a 1 yard maybe is the smallest dumpster you can get out there. 30 yard is going to be really, really large. So you don't see that in too many other places, square yards, or cubic yards, I guess. But yeah, you can definitely, there are emissions factors for each type of waste. And then you can also do things like waste characterization studies where you're doing like a waste audit to figure out, okay, what all on average is actually going into our trash, is actually going into our recycling, is actually going into organics or compost. Imperfect and Misfits, we worked with a company called Watershed to identify the emissions factors and then the total emissions of our waste. We had pretty detailed data that we had, gotten together in order to measure our carbon footprint. So there are definitely emissions from all types of waste, but a lot fewer emissions from compost, organics, and recycling than there are from landfill.
I'm really glad you mentioned Watershed, because as we think about the world, GLYNT's in the world of sustainability data preparation, and our customers send it to Watershed or Fig Bites or Microsoft or, and. But there's this moment called submit your data or type in your data. No. So if you had to give advice to a sustainability manager who's confronting that submit or upload moment, and you want to talk about waste, what are the two things they should do to get their act together so they have that data ready and it's the right data.
Yeah, well, this is part of the reason that we've partnered with GLYNT, because there's this interesting middle mile, right, where you may have all of your raw data. And a lot of times, like you said, that's coming from invoices, or that is coming from something that is related to payments, right? It's saying, okay, you sent us 40 tons of trash in March. And so here's how much you're going to pay for that. But also what's really important in that is the amount of waste itself, right? Sometimes you have to kind of do some back end math to figure out approximately how much waste was sent. And then oftentimes that data is really uneditable, right? It's living on a PDF or maybe even a paper document somewhere. And then you want to get it onto an Excel sheet or Google sheet so that you can start to do your calculations for emissions. And that could be a little bit of a painful or time-consuming conversion, taking something that is hard to edit and making it more useful. So, GLYNT is one of those great companies that can do this, that can help make that conversion possible. And I think hopefully in the future, we're looking at, a more integrated system where maybe that data is already living online, or it's incorporated in your payment processing, software or whatnot. So, but right now it's a lot of PDFs and a lot of paper documents that you're trying to scrape that data from.
Thanks. And then my last question, let's wave our magic wand. And what do you want in 2025 in the world of waste? What would you like to see happen? What would make the biggest strategic impact?
I would love to see everyone have access to composting or a better end of life for any foods that they don't eat. We're all getting ready for Thanksgiving, and it is Thanksgiving, day after Thanksgiving are two of the biggest days of food waste in the US. And, some food waste is inevitable, right? You're trimming off ends and bits and things that, you can't cook with, right? But if you don't have an option to do better than landfill at your home, then it's really hard to avoid that impact. The emissions from food waste are something like 5 times, greater globally than the emissions of the entire aviation sector. And we're talking military, domestic, private, all of that. So it really, really adds up. And I would just love for everyone to have access to something better than landfill for their food waste and for anything that can be composted. So that would be my dream if I could wave a magic wand, is that everybody in the US has access to compost.
You've hit on one of the trends I think for 2025 as well, is like we will say you can't manage what you don't measure, and that's starting to move through at the corporate level, but the end of life is often at the consumer level. And so we'll see increased visibility for consumers, so like emissions into product measurement, and increased responsibility for consumers around end of life. So 2025 starts moving to the consumer. I think that the trend starts there. Thanks for joining Sustainability Square One, and talk with you again.
Thanks, Martha.